Hello and welcome to the fourth Slushpile Standouts video. My name is David Brown. I'm a senior editor at Darling Axe Editing, darlingaxe.com. And we're going to do things a little bit differently today. So I'm going to cut over to a Zoom video that I've made with a couple other Darling Axe editors, Michelle Barker and Tara Gilboy. And I'm going to read the submissions to them that came in from our very kind writers who volunteered their first pages for us to look at. And Michelle and Tara are going to decide when and where we stop, and then we'll go into a discussion from there. So let's get right into it. Michelle, is this one's for you.
Okay.
London, 1819. I am a knight errant, Mrs. Fortescue muttered, and this is an enchanted thicket through which I must hack my way in order to regain my lost fortune. For once, of course, her brother-in-law was actually listening. It's our breakfast room, Walter said, affronted, not a thicket. I can eat nothing this morning, Julia declared complacently, shaking out her napkin. Nothing. Some thickets look like thickets, some like breakfast rooms. That's what makes them enchanted, offered Mrs. Fortescue helpfully.
Okay, that's where I would stop.
Okay.
Okay, I have to say that I really enjoy the dialogue in this, the beginning of this piece. I think it's funny. I think it's unusual, it's unexpected, and I think that the author does a good job with the dialogue. When I heard the first declared complacently, the combination of the elaborate tag with the adverb, that was the first one. And I thought, okay, there's one. But then when I saw the second one, then I thought, oh, okay, no, this is something that's going to be happening a lot. And I have a particular pet peeve when it comes to elaborate tags that are especially accompanied by adverbs, neither of which I think are necessary. I think that he said, she said really does the job. And adverbs are usually, they're usually the mark of an author who's nervous that their dialogue is not doing its job. And, you know, really, in this case, the dialogue is doing its job. The dialogue is great. So be confident and don't use those adverbs. Usually people will put them in because the dialogue is not pulling its weight, and they figure that the adverb is going to be the thing that's going to buoy it up. And you shouldn't be relying on adverbs no matter what. But in this case, really, like, you don't need them. You know, trust your dialogue because it's good. So that's the first thing that I would say. But I'll hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing. And actually, as I was reading, I was like, ooh, Michelle's going to stop it because I know how you feel about adverbs and dialogue. And I agree with you. I am also more of, just stick with the said, you want the dialogue tags to disappear, to kind of be in that fictional dream. Another thing I noticed in this submission as well, though, is that I felt like we had kind of that floating heads kind of dialogue, right? Like there's not a lot of detail that's kind of grounding you in the scene. So I'm not getting a good idea, for example, of where the characters are sitting, those little action beats I think could work instead of dialogue tags too, just to kind of help place the reader in the scene a little bit more.
Mm-hmm, that's a good idea. Did you have anything to add, David?
No, I absolutely agree. I was snagging on the same thing, and I would also maybe just add that, yeah, the dialogue tags, or the adverbs for me, quite often, I'm not 100% against adverbs. I think every once in a while they can have their place, but they're not specific. They're usually a very general kind of image that doesn't really plant something specific in the reader's mind.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing I would do if I was going to sharpen this up, I looked at the line of, for once, of course, her brother-in-law was actually listening. Well, the brother-in-law responds, so it's very clear that he's listening. So I don't really think that probably needs to be pointed out. But the other thing too, he says, it's our breakfast room, Walter said, affronted, which again, affronted is, it's already declared, it's already sort of included in the dialogue and you don't need it. But then he says, not a thicket. And this is one of those things where less is more in terms of a punch, I think, because if all he says is it's our breakfast room, that's all he really needs to say. I don't think he needs to add anything more to that. And the more you start developing stuff like that, the less of a punch it packs. So I feel like probably paring it down would be a better way to get the point across as well.
I think that you pointed out the word affronted too, which I also noticed because to me that felt like a point of view slip, where I'm kind of wondering now whose point of view am I in? Because I was assuming that I'm in Mrs. Fortescue's point of view, and then as soon as we get that affronted, it makes me think, oh, am I in his point of view now? I don't know. So
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and then when Julia declares complacently, that's actually another shift again. I haven't noticed that until you said it, but you're right. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Anything else, or should we move on to the next one?
I think we can move on. I mean, I think there's lots to like about that. I like there's lots of energy in the dialogue. So I think there's lots that can be done with it.
yeah, I do like the voice a lot. It reminds me of a lot of those like Jane Austen style novels, and that's kind of humor. And I really like that. That's something, yeah, I enjoy it. So.
Okay, great. So this one's for Tara.
Okay.
It's an indecisive river roaming through the landscape in a wildly winding way, sometimes heading back in the direction from which it came before snaking round toward another compass point. A slow-moving river. The fellow poling a raft sweats a little as he maneuvers around the many bends. He's a small, wiry man, his raft made of logs lashed together and topped with planks that form a solid, dry deck. Periodically, he pulls up to the riverbank where seams of clay are visible and easily carved out with his hands. He heaps clay onto the raft and continues downstream, adding to his store at various spots along the way. There is no breeze on this day, no sound beyond his movements on the river, water dripping from his pole, the rhythmic glide and pause of the raft's progress, his breathing. There are no rustlings, excuse me, anywhere along the riverbanks, which are treeless, as if the river flows through desert. It's too early yet for much to have taken shape in his surroundings. On a sandbar at a sharp curve in the river, he stops, the sun at its zenith. He transfers the clay to the damp sand at the river's edge, kneels there, and begins his work. The medium is not perfect, the clay flecked with bits of dried stems and seeds and grains of sand. But he forms it into something he thinks he can work with. Long, lean limbs, a cage of ribs, the rigid breastbone, a shield for the heart. Last is the head, with its sensory apparatus, which he fashions with great care. He kneels in damp sand, the sun drilling into his back. One bird sits on a leafless twig, singing witchety, 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 over and over again. He looks up at it, a black mask, and a brilliant yellow throat swelling with its song. The shape his hands have made lies gray and lifeless.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. I let this one go for a little bit longer because I think the writing is so beautiful. I really think that the writer is creating some great images here. The reason I stopped you is because I think there are some parts, for example, when we backed up with like sensory apparatus, and then again, the shape his hands have made is I'm starting to feel like the descriptions are getting a little bit vague, and I want to be able, like, especially sensory apparatus, I wanted more of an image of that instead of just sensory apparatus, right? Because I can't picture that. So there were some vague things. I think that this is beautifully written though, and I love especially like the witchety, 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 and the image that we're getting of the man. I wish I knew more about the man right now though. But I would hope that that's coming soon. What were your impressions?
I really like this one. The first couple of words, it's an indecisive river. I thought was so, I thought this was lovely. And I really like the way that first paragraph it feels like sort of a slow zoom of the camera. So you're like sort of farther away and then you're slowly moving in and you're seeing this man, and then you start to get the sensory details and the noises of the water, the gliding and the water dripping from his pole and his breathing. I found that the sensory details in this piece were very effectively done. And again, as you say, like the bird singing and all of that stuff. The only thing that I had to say about it when I was thinking about it was at a certain point, he says it's too early yet for much to have taken shape. And then in the next sentence, the sun is at its zenith. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, where did all the time go? I don't understand. So like I was taken out of the story for a second there because the pacing felt off to me. It was suddenly it was noon. basically, and I didn't understand how that had happened. But other than that, I found this to be very engaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I really like the language here. Right from the first couple sentences, I was engaged. I was there. It's very visual. It's quite like cinematic. Um, yeah, I wondered about the time of day, and exactly like how much time was passing. And yeah, I did stop to wonder a couple times, and and the other thing that I noted when I read on a little bit, like to the end of the page, was that it's starting to get almost magical. And that's what made me wonder about the sensory apparatus, if there wasn't something there that was like something weird, something alien that would maybe seem a bit hokey to name outright, or not would seem hokey, but might like feel that way for the writer to name it like too bluntly. And so you might be inclined to say something a little bit more vague, like this is a hint that something's weird here or something's unlike what you might think it is. But I agree that that doesn't quite cut it. I think that that's being specific is always good, and planting that. And so if there is something about this head, if it has antennae or something like that, then it would be good to have a little subtle hint of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking too, or just, not even needing to name it, just describing what it looks like, a little bit more clearly, because everything else on that page has been described so beautifully. So it just felt to me, I paused there because that was the one thing that wasn't described. It was just named sensory apparatus. So
For sure.
one thing to watch on that one I noticed too is there were at the beginning, and it definitely wouldn't have stopped me because it's so beautifully written, but there were a lot of sentences that were starting with there is, there are, and I always try to avoid those.
Oh, you're right too. Yeah, I had not noticed that. That is true.
Okay. Should we go on to the next one then?
Sure.
Okay. So this one will be for Michelle. Screen shared. All right. So after jogging his usual 2 miles in the dewy morning air, Dr. Elaine Paleo Rue showered and dressed in a pair of jeans. Jeans were a treat he allowed himself because it was Saturday and none of the other scientists would be at Bay Genetics to admonish him, the lone paleogeneticist, for being too casual. But Saturday or not, he had to go to the lab to make sure his paleo embryos were receiving sufficient nutrients and accelerated growth hormone. Wearing his favorite linen shirt and a spritz of cologne, the one Meridian said she liked when they were on one of their lunch dates, he climbed into his matte black Jaguar XJ. Even with the sun barely above the horizon, he knew Meridian would already be at Bay Gen. She said she'd be working the weekend shift, which meant she'd be there absurdly early. She took punctuality seriously. In fact, she handled every aspect of her job with precision. He appreciated that about her. His work required the same type of dedication and gravity, and that wasn't something the few women he dated understood. He backed out of the garage and drove off down his quiet tree-lined street. The neighborhood was eclectic, partway between the ostentatious excesses of the nouveau riche and the stately homes of the old world wealthy. His house hovered between the two, a remodeled Victorian with laminate flooring instead of hardwood and a distinctive lack of antique furniture. But it was his home and he liked it. Crossing the Bay Bridge into San Francisco was a breeze on an early Saturday morning. Hardly any traffic, which presented the opportunity to daydream without worrying about getting into a fender bender. Early morning was his favorite time of the day, when the ocean shimmered as the sun silently crawled out from the depths of night. With the window down, he inhaled the cleansing, salty fresh air and felt one with the ocean.
Well, I didn't stop you because I just loved this one. I was engaged in this from start to finish. I thought there were so many touches that that were well done. The author gives this guy a nickname. Comments like jeans were a treat he allowed himself, and it was his home and he liked it. There were just these little things that made me feel like I was getting to know him, and I loved the handling of his relationship with Meridian. And it's to me, it was the author used a very light touch. indicating that there was something going on, but we don't quite know what. You know, he wears the cologne that he knows she likes. He's obviously going there. I mean, he says he's going there to check on his paleo embryos, but he knows she's going to be there early, and he's going there early. And so these were things that I really enjoyed. Having said that, though, I would, after this page, be hoping for some dialogue, some interaction, something going on between two characters. When near the end there, when he says it gave him the opportunity to daydream, I thought, I hope this is not going to move into a daydream, because if it is, then I'm going to start to get impatient. To me, this was like the perfect amount of exposition and description and whatever, and then next page there better be some dialogue. That was sort of my feeling, but I definitely would have kept on reading because I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Wow, I'm surprised. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I enjoyed it too as well. I think there's some good writing here, and these are characters that I'm interested in. The thing for me though is I kind of felt like we were getting it all told to us, right? And I think if I was editing this book, I would suggest that the author open the scene with him arriving at the lab, so that we could maybe see him interact at the lab, so that we're kind of not getting it on his way there in the car as kind of this backstory. But like you said, if the next page had some of that dialogue and scene that I was looking for, I'd probably be okay with this the way it is. I just wanted to see, I guess I wanted to see him maybe interacting with his, you know, the girl and everything, and at the lab, instead of getting it as kind of his thoughts as he's driving.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if I thought about it a lot more, I might be persuaded to what you're saying as well, because normally I'm also like let's get onto the scene like right away. But I just felt like the writing was so good that I was allowing it. But I was also thinking, next page there better be interaction, next page, because it's gotta come. So what did you think, David?
Yeah, I agree with Tara. I felt that that it was a lot of telling. It was like a block of context, that a lot of this stuff could be easily transmitted in a scene, rather than as a summary. And I did like the writing. Definitely there's some like just subtle hints about things, but it's still hinting within kind of a summary mode, that I wasn't connecting with right away. But I do like the language, and it gives me the sense of something that could be polished into a really nice opening. If it did start with, yeah, again, like a specific scene, and allowing the reader to intuit some of these details. The other thing I wondered about, like, I guess for me, it's like about how zoomed out kind of the camera angle is. And when I feel zoomed out, I feel less connected to what's going on. And it also feels like this is definitely in a deep third person, but at the same time, there's a little bit of omniscience here, where he's driving, he's backing out, and he's driving down the street, and it's like there's this description of the house, but it's his home and he liked it. And I don't know, I'm not convinced that that's what he's actually thinking about in this moment. This is like for the reader's benefit, like, oh yeah, just so you know, this is what his house looks like. But he's actually, you know, if we're in his deep third, what is he thinking about as he leaves his house? Is he thinking about Meridian? So I want to be a little bit, like, if we're going to be in this deep third, I want to be a little bit closer, more connected to that POV.
That's a good point. I paused at that house thing too, for the exact same reason. It felt like it was put in there for the reader's benefit, you know, because we're learning about work and then the house, and it almost felt like the author was trying to put it all, you know, in that first page. So that
a bit of a tour. Yeah. No, that's true. I could be persuaded towards your side easily, but yeah. But there was lots to like. I think the one of the things, actually, maybe the only thing for me that I would change was the description of the matte black Jaguar XJ. I felt like, and I've noticed this before in writing that I've read, where people will throw in sort of a description of something that we really don't need, because it's not important. The fact that it's a Jaguar is important. The fact that it's matte black it doesn't matter, you know. And you know how those things just get sort of tossed in. I felt like I probably, if I was line editing, I would have crossed that out. So, but that's very picky. So
That's a really good point though, because it's those details that tell us something about the character, right? Like the jaguar clearly says something about who he is, but the other stuff doesn't. So
yeah, yeah.
All right, should we go on to the next one?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right, this one's for Sarah. Oh, get the screen shared. If Quani were to speak the truth, thereby turning his back on generations of Macaulays, he would have to confess that he was not in the best mood that day, although it was no excuse for killing someone. Yes, his girlfriend had dumped him the previous night and left a box of his stuff at her dad's yard because she didn't want him coming round to the flat anymore, but still. The gates to the yard were open, although none of her dad's tow trucks were there. Her red Ford Anglia sat just inside the gates, and his heart lifted a little. The double doors to the garage lay ajar, and he assumed she was working inside. He imagined her in oil-stained dungarees as usual. As he drew close, he heard a man's voice. We fucking warned your old man. All scrap cars around here belong to us now, but he won't listen, so now we're gonna take a souvenir. Just fuck off, she shouted. Anything happens to me, you'll get yours. He had never known her to be frightened, but here it was. We're going to take a souvenir for you, the voice repeated. Let's see, a finger maybe, or an ear? Quani, I'm not getting that accent, sorry. Quani stood in the crack between the doors and saw the backs of two men, one small and wiry, the other well-built and holding a big hunting knife.
all right, I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you there. I think that this, when we first started reading, like felt like this scene had a lot of potential because we always talk about start with something big, right? The first line definitely got my attention because he talks about it's no excuse, for killing someone. So I'm thinking, okay, what's gonna happen? You got my interest. But I feel like here it's possible that it would have been better to start a little bit before because I felt like I didn't really know the characters enough to understand what was going on so that I couldn't care about what was happening, right? Like I know that this is a very high stakes scene and the tension is really high, but because I don't know the characters, I don't feel invested enough in them yet to care about the outcome. So I think I would have liked to have backed up a little bit. I also thought there were some issues with the dialogue kind of like putting in, that explaining stuff where they're like, oh, here, let me explain why we're here. Your old man wouldn't do this. And then also I'm kind of wondering like, well, if she just broke up with him, why is he there? And why is he just sitting there and watching when they're threatening, to cut off her finger? So I guess I was feeling a little bit confused. And I think it's just a matter of being, they say start in the action, but I think maybe it would have been better to start before the action in this case, just to kind of feel invested and understand what's happening a bit more.
Yeah, that whole advice of starting in the action is something that I have to take issue with because I feel like when you do that, when you start with action, you're giving us action without any context, and it's exactly what you say, Tara, is that that's great, it's action, except that we have no connection to the characters, and so we don't care about the outcome, and so even though it's moving, which is wonderful, it's as you say, it's started with not enough feeling and not enough, basically just not enough context for us to have a feeling for who these people are. But the thing that and maybe this was me being confused because I was thinking about this when I had read it earlier. He starts with that line, although it was no excuse for killing someone, which is a great line. I completely agree. But then isn't this then the rest of this flashback? Like that's the thing that I wasn't sure it is it? Because that was the feeling that I got. And I thought, oh, I have a feeling that he really wants to keep that line. It was no excuse for killing someone, which is a great line, but it's causing all sorts of problems because it's forcing an unnecessary flashback. And to have a flashback in the first paragraphs of the opening of a novel, to me, is not a good idea. That's not something that I would do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Michelle. I had the same thought that it's like, okay, here's this great line, no excuse for killing someone. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And then, yes, his girlfriend had dumped him the previous night. And I thought, oh, did he kill his girlfriend? Like, what are we being told about? But it's actually, he's about to kill someone. And now
Yes.
we've jumped back to like leading up to that moment. And yeah, like how can you stay in that moment as a reader, not knowing the context and not do a double take at least a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of mental gymnastics that have to happen on the reader's part right in the beginning of a novel, which is generally not a good idea. You know, rather than making things easy for the reader, I think that the author is actually making things quite difficult, quite a bit more difficult than they need to be too, because if this was just straightened out a little bit, I think it would be great. There's lots to like here. I wanted to ask you guys though, what do you feel, how do you feel about the dialect that's thrown in there?
The accent's not coming off the page for me. I don't know exactly what accent I'm supposed to be reading. Like maybe spelled like that. I see people put that in chat all the time. Like that's a very common internetism that isn't related to an accent. It's just like being silly on the internet. And Frey, I just wasn't sure exactly what accent I'm supposed to be hearing.
Yeah, I thought maybe that was a typo, even especially that Frey, the one, I was confused about that as well.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, no, I wasn't sure either. And I mean, in general, I think it's probably not a great idea to use stuff like that because it definitely, for me anyways, I snag on things like that. I mean, I know that there are like entire novels that are written like that and they, you know, some of them can do very well. I generally have a hard time with that, but that's just me as a reader. So
Dialect is extremely difficult. Like
Mhm.
there's some stuff that I will pick up and start reading and it's like instantly I hear that accent in my head and it's not even an accent I know very well, but it just comes off the page perfectly. But that is super rare.
Mhm.
Usually it's very distracting. And
Yeah.
I think that you can do a lot more with word choice than you can with spelling, with phonetic spelling.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, less is definitely more. I think even sometimes too with dialect, even just the rhythms of the speech without needing to change the spelling of the word or just, you know, people have that lilt to sometimes the rhythms, which is hard to do. But what's the thing I was just thinking though for this, and maybe this is thinking too far into it, this a good place to start this page might be with the girlfriend breaking up with him, because that would be enough probably to hook the reader seeing that breakup scene, and then you could lead into, you know, what happens the next day.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a really good idea because there would be some emotion at least first, right? And then when he comes back to just get his stuff, and he, you know, he may still have feelings for her or whatever, depending on how that earlier scene is developed. That yeah, then everything would have more context and it would resonate a lot more. That's a really good idea. And then there wouldn't be the flashback that we need to deal with right now.
For sure. Awesome. Okay. Next one. So back to Michelle. Georgios lay peacefully, deep in the slumber brought on by a day of exhausting fieldwork. I envied him. I could never shut the world out, no matter how grueling the day had been. It did not surprise me that I was awake and he was snoring. Isakio's quick rhythmic breathing, the only other sound, my heart filled by his young innocence. At sunset, Georgios had come home, covered in dirt and sweat, bringing an earthy smell to our little hut. The planting is complete, he declared. Pour the wine. We toasted to the gods, to Demeter for a bountiful harvest. Isaac laughed and babbled, not understanding the triumph, but joyous all the same. Georgios dutifully swallowed my porridge as I fed our boy. You're a terrible cook, but a good wife, he laughed, humor always in his brown eyes, permanently squinted from a life in the sun. He kissed my forehead and collapsed on the pallet, asleep in moments. I sat now at the shutters, easing one open just enough to feel cool night air.
Okay, so I may as well stop you there.
All right.
I mean, this is the same issue that we had in the previous one, where there is a shift to flashback that really doesn't need to be there. It's not necessary, and also not advisable, because flashback, no matter what you do with flashback is like day old bread. It's never going to have the same immediacy. It's never going to have the same tension, anything that a present moment scene is going to have. So you really just don't want to use it unless you absolutely have to. And you do not absolutely have to in this scene. And you certainly don't want to shift into flashback in the opening paragraphs of a novel. So as much as I liked the scene and the you know, we were toasting to the gods, and I like that. I also love the dialogue, you're a terrible cook but a good wife. I thought that was lovely, but just that switch into flashback is like right away as a reader, you've lost me, like almost immediately. So
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't see a reason not to just start with Giorgio's came home at sunset. I mean, you could just start with that sentence and work in the details that are in that first paragraph later. That was, I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. Yeah.
I like the writing in that one, and I think we're getting some really good character development here as far as, just little details of the way he speaks to his wife, and we're getting some, right away we know that this is taking place as a historical setting, they're toasting Demeter and all these things. So I think there's a lot of good world building going on as well, but that flashback is just kind of throwing a wrench into everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so unnecessary. I mean, you just didn't have to do it that way. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, that's it. I have nothing else to add. Michelle, did you have anything else there?
No, I think that was it. I mean, I think that this has lots of potential. And I mean, it wouldn't take much to change it, to get it on its feet. So, but just don't open with a flashback. Not necessary.
I do like the, I mean, I was kind of a little bit confused just because I guess when you're starting something out, you're also always trying to find that grounding, the perspective. And so Giorgio's lay peacefully, deep in slumber, and that kind of like focus on Giorgio's then was a little bit of a jump to be, I envied him. So it was like, here's the kind of camera angle, and then it like jumped away, and now it's somebody else. So that kind of was a little bit of an issue for me too. But otherwise, that line, I envied him. I could never shut the world out, no matter how grueling the day had been. There's a bit of character in that.
But but the nice thing is though, is that because it returns to, I think I cut you off before they get to the point where he's sleeping again. It would just have been so much easier to move that down. And it's a wonderful line. I envied him, his ability to sleep. But all you need to do is move it down to when he actually is sleeping, So yeah.
Cool. We've got one more. So thanks very much to everyone who submitted. This has been lots of fun. So one more and we're back to Tara.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. Upon a large, low interior stone buttress in the vast kitchen, she sat, alone. Her knees were drawn up snug against her breast. Dark gray, ragged skirt pulled tightly around her legs, covering all except her bare toes. She blinked and dozed off and on. One might consider the waif to be deformed and unsound of mind, until, perchance, one glimpsed a promising wisp of golden hair lifted by a warm draught from the ovens, or noticed her eyes, a glint of intelligence, to be cast off from the reflections of the fires. If one asked, one would even find she had a name, Teresa. Wrapping her tired body in the permeating warmth being thrust out from the massive fireplace, she drew forth some little vestige of energy emerging from her soul. The child had finished her scullery duties and hung back as the kitchen became deserted. She hoped to pilfer a still usable stub of a candle to take to her cell. Since all candle stubs were cast into a black iron cauldron and held until someone took the time to melt them to be recast with new wicks and readied for use by the downstairs servants, she was sure no one would note that a stub was missing.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. The reason I stopped you there was, well, there were a couple of things. I was interested in this character at the beginning, and so there was some vague language at the beginning where I was almost going to stop you. For example, things like, if one asked, one would even find she had a name, Teresa. It just really distanced me instead of being more close up with that point of view. I felt like it was just kind of this removed point of view, but I kept going because I was interested in this child, and I'm interested in the setting. But then when we got to that detail about, since all candle stubs were cast into a black iron cauldron and held until someone took the time to melt them to be recast with new wicks and ready for use by the downstairs servants, like that's such a huge mouthful, right? The sentence itself is very confusing, and it seems to be a detail that I didn't think needed to be there. I just wanted to stay in the moment with this child rather than getting kind of what I thought was unnecessary detail about how the candles were made. But a big problem that I was flagging on even before we got there was some of that vague language that was happening. If one, perchance, it just seemed a little bit distant to me. So
yeah, there's a lot of wordiness in this piece, I think. Wrapping her tired body in the permeating warmth being thrust out from the massive fireplace. That's a long way of saying she sat by the warm fire, Um, and it just, to me, it just felt a little bit too cumbersome. There was just a little bit too much going on there. I have an allergic reaction to the word soul generally, because I always feel like it's so abstract, and everybody means something different when they talk about that it's almost a word that you can't use anymore. So as soon as I see that, I'm sort of thinking, I right away I'm on guard when I hear that word. But the use of the word one in that opening paragraph was something that I wouldn't do.
There's some interesting things going on here. There's a couple interesting images, and a lot of words, definitely. Like the fact that she's going to do this with the candle. Like I just want to see her do that with the candle. I don't want to be told about it or have it explained. I just want to see her do it, and I'll just wonder why she's doing it. And maybe I'll figure that out as the scene goes on. But to be perfectly honest, I may have stopped this after the first sentence, because that first sentence to me was kind of a deal breaker. Like, upon a large, low interior stone buttress in the vast kitchen, she sat. I just don't feel like that's there's no action. She's just sitting there. She sat. So we've got a description of a place, we've got the locale, and we've got someone sitting, but that's not enough of a line to draw me into a story, especially that first sentence that's supposed to give me a hint of theme, or a forecast of plot, or a tangible note of character, and it's just not doing any of those things. And so right from the beginning, I was like, okay, what's actually going on here?
Yeah, there's some sort of like weird distancing. There's some passive writing. There's a lot of wordiness. And I think, again, like there's some great stuff in there. If you can raise it to the surface, and then pare away the words that don't need to be there. The image of the girl, the candles, and all of those sorts of things. There's something there, but I think all the other stuff needs to be sort of cut away from it.
It gets buried a bit. And I'm glad, David, that you brought up the first sentence too, because I noticed, like, even in that first sentence, like that low stone buttress, it's a very non-specific image, right? Like when you just hear low stone buttress, I'm not getting any sort of concrete image in my head from that. And I think that a lot of times people will, use a lot of, long sentences and kind of this flowery language, but when you do that, you lose some of what would be more powerful than that, I guess, is that really concrete, specific imagery. Just choose the one right word instead of a really long, flowery way of saying something.
Yeah, for sure. Just like, I often tell clients, like, to try to focus all of your clarity on the moment-to-moment experience of what's going on in this scene, and then show a person doing something. It's difficult to be clear. It's one thing I think a lot of people don't realize, is that I think a lot of authors don't want to be clear because they think it'll be too obvious. But actually, clarity is difficult. It's worth striving for.
Yeah, I always heard a great analogy that Stephen King gives, that I often repeat to people, and that I try to think of myself as well, with writing being a form of telepathy. So that you have this picture in your head, and you're trying to transmit it into the heads of readers, and you want to be able to do that as effectively as you possibly can, which means you have to be specific. It means you have to include sensory details so that they're getting the smells, they're getting the whole picture that you have in your head. Yeah, you're right. It's not an easy thing to do. But when you think of it that way, when you think of it as like, I've got this image and I want to give it to you in the most complete and full way that I can, what do I need to do in order to do that? Detail, movement, dialogue, voice, all these things that come together to create that picture.
I think that clarity trumps everything. If you have to choose, right, always choose clarity.
Okay, great. Well, we had some great submissions and some great conversations. So thanks again to everyone who submitted, and And thank you both, Michelle and Tara, very much for coming online and participating.
Yeah, that was super fun.
That was so fun. Yes, thank you. And it's so brave for people to submit to these. I've been watched these before and never have been brave enough to submit my own. Thank you for everyone for being brave.
Yes, agreed.
Okay. All right. So until next time.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for watching. For more information about the craft, querying agents, and all those sorts of writerly things, please check us out at darlingaxe.com. We've got the chopping blog with a ton of great resources and articles on there, as well as our book broker agent interview series. And if you'd like to participate in future Slushpile Standouts videos, please send me an email at darlingaxe@gmail.com. Thanks again, everyone.